Good morning. Welcome to the Point. In just over 4 weeks, you'll be making some big decisions about the future of Michigan. One of the races you'll be asked to vote on is Secretary of State. This morning, the Republican and Democratic candidate for that office, starting with the GOP's Mary Treater Lang. Well, let's start with who you are and what you've done, what brings you to this point in your life, and how your life experience would translate if you're successful in running for Secretary of State.
Thank you, Rick. I am Mary Treater Lang and running hard to be our next Secretary of State. My background is basically 30 years. I've been a CPA. I've ran various divisions and operations, both in business, finance, sales, as well as computer security. 15 of those years have been really focused on computer security. Protecting the integrity of the vote is really a key component of my platform. But my experience level, both being a CPA as well as a chartered global management accountant, which is an international recognition, I have that business financial background. I bring not only technology, I bring business, I bring innovation, I bring out-of-the-box thinking, as well as strong executive leadership. Ones in where I've been extremely successful, and I work in a very collaborative team background, and that's why I've driven that success.
When you look at the job of Secretary of State, and we'll talk about the process of running in a moment, because it's only a few weeks ago you got your party's nomination, but you've been traveling a lot. And I want to talk about that because I think people sometimes fail to recognize what an effort it is to run for a statewide office. But let's talk about this office. Unique because in many states you have a Department of Motor Vehicles and you have a Chief Elections Officer, and the two of those are separate. Here in the state of Michigan, they're combined, making it a pretty heavy workflow for the Secretary of State's office. That's a pretty big job, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big job, and actually we're one of 2 states that have that combined effort. That's why it's critical that we have an individual that has the modern day set of skills to drive us forward. The budget is over $250 million and over $2.5 billion. I mean, grasp this. $2.5 billion are collected every year in fees. So when I say I have the modern day set of skills, it's really something that we need to drive our state forward. We've done a tremendous amount to move us forward in the last 8 years, but to keep moving in that direction, you need someone that can oversee that type of departments, both from the election standpoint and with my computer security being so strong as it is, over 15 years of experience, and complementing with the business, the CPA side of the house, running those type of operations, both $2.5 billion collecting in fees, $250 million, and being able to be successful in the past and improve in history, not being political, coming here as an outsider, bringing those skills to the state, and really giving back as an individual that has been 100% pure Michigan. I've lived my entire life here. As a matter of fact, we're expecting our first grandchild.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much. In 2.5 weeks, and it will be the 7th generation of Michiganders for us. My husband and I have 33 years, have 3 children, and they're here. So we want to keep them here, make it a state that is forever thriving.
This is an issue that you and I were talking about before we started, and it is impacted and felt very much from the Secretary of State's office, though it's driven from either the legislature or insurance companies or both, depending on how they interact. And they're 2 separate issues. One is, I was telling you with my birthday coming up not too long from now, I got that little birthday card from the Secretary of State's office saying, send us this much money for your birthday.
Yeah. In addition to happy birthday.
That's right, to license your vehicles. Those registration fees have gone up. And we know that insurance, particularly on the east side of the state, you were talking about your experience from Wayne County, but all of us have those questions about why insurance is so expensive and or the cost to renew license plates and those kind of things. As Secretary of State, you don't have direct control over either of those, but you would have influence to, I would imagine, suggest to the legislature. What would your thoughts be?
Well, my thoughts are really, this is where my business acumen comes into play. Being a CPA, I can do more with less. And right out of the gates, I plan on finding ways that I can save money in the budget. And I'd like to go to the legislature, which I already have a team in place to produce bills. But one of them is to go to them and ask them to reduce the taxpayers' fees associated with these fees that are established by them, and with the savings that I'm able to produce. I've been in many positions throughout my business career, and I've shown ways of saving money. And that's just the CPA mentality, is doing more with less. And I intend on doing that and being able to send it back to the taxpayers and reduce fees.
When you think about insurance, that is another huge legislative hurdle, and it's one that, again, can't be achieved unless you get some of the interested parties to go along. And that has really been the problem all of these years that I've covered the legislature. Every time the issue about dealing with auto no-fault insurance, you've got lawyers, and you've got medical facilities, and you've got all of these different interests out there. But as Secretary of State, you no doubt will hear, and I know you've said as a candidate you have heard on the campaign trail, about insurance costs too.
Yeah, the insurance costs are extremely high. And I know that there's a whole legislative team. I was up in Gladwin over the weekend, and Representative Jason Wentworth is really making this a top priority in the next legislative team. And I will work as Secretary of State to continue to monitor and control unauthorized insurance dealers. And I'll make that and continue to clean that up as I do the voter rolls and many other things that are associated with the responsibilities. But particularly with insurance, that would be my role. But I will work hand in hand. I mentioned earlier that I really work in a team approach, collaboratively, and that's where I've been successful throughout my years, and that's how I intend on doing with the legislative and my staff within the Secretary of State's office.
You touched on it for just a moment. We talked about auto insurance. We talked about the cost of getting your license plate, and that's something that impacts most of us on a yearly basis, but something that is very, very important to everybody in the state of Michigan is voter security. You talked about ballot box security, making sure the vote is secure. You talked about cleaning up the rolls. That process has continued over the years, but how do you make sure that our elections are free from outside interference, negligence, people forgetting to take their names off the voter rolls, everything from mistakes to mischief or maliciousness?
Right. Well, my platform of security, optimization, and stability is something that we've been delivering for the last 12 months throughout the state. But the security portion, one citizen, one vote. That portion of my platform, well, I specifically identify ways that you just suggested, ones in which we're going to have state-of-the-art training for the clerks, as well as poll workers. And this is all going to be done within 30 days of the election. They're going to be certified, proven that they are able to go in there and do the job that is entailed for those particular positions. From the understaffed precincts that we've had in the past, I plan on having recruiting poll workers, partnering up with businesses, libraries, service organizations, and even colleges to make sure that we have a team in place and that are able to be readily dispersed to any understaffed precincts to avoid those problems we've had in the past. But as far as cleaning up the voter rolls, Ruth has done a fabulous job participating in the interstate cross-check. It's about 12 states in which, as you move to a different state, we remove you from our files. And she's removed close to 300,000 in that process. I plan on participating with Erica States, which is another 22 states, to do that as well. I also intend on developing relationships with every single Secretary of State across the state to develop a relationship so that we as a team can develop a way of cleaning each of our voters' rolls and sharing the data that is necessary in order to do so. And also, from a business perspective, utilize it to pick their brains on best practices so that I don't reinvent any wheels, and we utilize those skills that are readily available. But my computer security experience, and you touched on that in the question, really that's what differentiates me from any candidate that ran against me here in the Secretary of State and moving forward, is I've had over 15 years of computer security experience. I understand cyber theft. I understand cybersecurity. I go way back into the telecommunications industry when over 20 years ago I thought out of the box and hired a white hacker in order to show the vulnerabilities. So understanding how to protect not only the integrity of the vote, but protecting the information that's stored on each and every one of us at the Secretary of State's office. And just think for a moment, all the information the Secretary of State's office has. It's critical, more than ever, that we have a firewall in place, that we're protecting that information so it cannot be tapped by any cyber theft.
You talk about your experience, and so many of these things that we hear about cyber theft and all of that is so much in the news every day. What makes you want to move from the private sector into the public arena, understanding that you've been doing this for about a year? You said you're traveling 6,000 miles a month. I mean, that's a big investment in time, and it is a big change from the private sector going into the public arena.
It sure is. It's a big move, but it's my opportunity to be able to give back to the state of Michigan. I mentioned we're going on to our 7th generation of Michiganders. I have the modern day set of skills that are necessary to move us forward, to move this department forward, and to continue the momentum that we've had. I can remember the lost decade 10 years ago, and I want to keep it far, far back in the rearview mirror. And all the more reason that we need someone that can drive us forward, lead with integrity, follow the rules of law, and have a team environment that creates that camaraderie and team spirit and customer service there at the branch level. That's my background. I have that tremendous background, and now it's my opportunity to give it back and to ensure that we continue that forward momentum. I mentioned my children. I mentioned my next generation of grandchildren. I don't want them ever having to leave the state because the opportunities are not here, our state's not healthy. It's my time to give my skills and give it to the state. And I'm delighted to do so as a 100% pure Michigander.
Up next, the Democratic candidate for Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, when we return to The Point. Welcome back to The Point. Secretary of State's an important office in the state of Michigan. You just heard from the GOP candidate. Now, here's the Democratic candidate, Jocelyn Benson. You've been on the show before, but I still want to go back to kind of the basics of who you are and what you've done, because as you well know, even though you've been at this for over a year, some people are just now starting to focus on the election because they had things like lives and jobs and all of that.
We all do, yes.
So let's talk a little bit about your background and what you've done.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I'm a military spouse and a mom. My husband served in Afghanistan in 2012. That's where we had a very challenging experience himself, trying to get his ballot in on time, and then ultimately was bounced back and as undeliverable. But my experiences as a military spouse have really defined who I am, as well as an executive. I'm the former dean of Wayne State Law School, where I successfully cut our budget, expanded our services, went up in the rankings during my tenure. And I'm also someone with a deep expertise in election law and administration. I wrote a book on the Secretary of State's office about 10 years ago, and throughout my entire professional career, I've been working on election law and voting rights, which, as you know, is the centerpiece of the Secretary of State's office as well.
There is so much to this office, and let's start with just that. Tell me about your approach to this, because we know that there are a number of questions that make people uneasy. Is my ballot secure? Do I have access to that ballot? And can I be sure that when I vote, my vote counts? How do you ensure those things?
Well, I think voter confidence in our democracy is critical, and I believe in making it easier to vote and harder to cheat. We need to expand access to the vote while ensuring we put every security measure in place to protect our democracy. And having done work in both those areas for many years, I have a plan in place to do both. We want to expand access to the vote through advocating for things like no reason absentee voting, making it easier to register to vote, but also election security is a key critical component to making sure we all can have confidence in our process. And I'm prepared on day one to implement a plan that will bring the best ideas from around the country here to Michigan to secure our elections. Random risk-limiting post-election audits, which are the audits of making sure our machines count our ballots accurately. Those have been the most statistically reliable sorts of post-election audits that are in place in 2 other states. We want to improve poll worker training, stiffen penalties for anyone who would try to hack our elections or tamper with our machines. And also I want to create an election security commission here in Michigan so that we are consistently staying ahead of all emerging threats to the security of our democracy.
One of the things that I am interested in going forward, I'm old enough to remember that on election night we waited until people counted the ballots and then we would get our returns. And as a reporter, I was pretty excited when things started being delivered much more quickly because of tabulations being done electronically, to the point now where we're starting to see election night results. If you look at primary night, we had some results very early on. But that also brings up the question of how secure are those electronic tabulations? What is your level of confidence that we've got a pretty good handle on that? When I say we, I mean, I'm talking about the universe of voters, because we're all using kind of sort of the same equipment, right?
Well, here in Michigan, we have optical scan machines, which are the most reliable type of machine you can have, but that doesn't mean they're impervious to hacking. And so we need to ensure that we're doing everything we can to evaluate them. Those post-election audits are the best way to make sure they're accurately counting our ballots. And I believe in accuracy and transparency, that we should be able to secure our ballots, but also be able to have a recount in all precincts if we need one. And we know in the past that there have been some challenges there here in Michigan. So we need to improve how we're securing our ballots, training our poll workers to implement those security measures. We need to make sure we're checking our machines consistently to make sure they're accurately counting our ballots. All of those are the ways that we can stay ahead of any threats to our election security as they emerge.
There's another big component to the Secretary of State's office here in Michigan, and I want to get to that. But before we get off voting, I want to talk to you about two ballot initiatives. One that would change fundamentally the way that districts are drawn for the U.S. House, the State Senate, and the State House, and that would largely be overseen by the Secretary of State's office. So that would be a big change. And the other it does some of the things you just talked about, would provide for no reason absentee voting. Your interactions with the Secretary of State's office when you renewed your driver's license or got one, you would be automatically registered unless you opted out. There are other provisions on those two, which are proposals 2 and 3 on the ballot. Give me your take, starting with 2.
Well, the Secretary of State will administer the Citizen Redistricting Commission if it does pass, and I am uniquely prepared to do just that. And I'll do it with an eye towards transparency, engaging everyone in the process so that we can have faith that it's being done with an eye towards the nonpartisan intent of the voters who are supporting it, and also making sure that we've got lots of involvement in the effort. I actually ran a citizen districting effort in 2011 here in Michigan. It was a nonpartisan way to invite citizens to draw districts the last time we did districting here in our state, and it was very successful. We actually submitted a plan to the legislature drawn by a citizen, a young student actually, who was at the Central Michigan University at the time, and we submitted his plan. It wasn't chosen, but we demonstrated that citizens can do a pretty good job drawing district lines. So I'm going to take that experience with me if I am selected as Secretary of State and chosen to administer this commission. On the other proposal with regards to the voter changes, I am a strong supporter of no reason absentee voting, early voting, and again, as a military spouse, I've experienced firsthand the need to improve how we ensure our military voters can get their votes back in time. And it also includes a provision to create those post-election audits that I was talking about earlier. So it does bring new things to the table. It would implement reforms that are not here in Michigan but are in many other states. And we need a Secretary of State who's going to be prepared on day one to implement securely these changes if they do pass. And I've got the right expertise and background to do that.
Going back for a moment to the redistricting question, this is something I've talked to politicians about for years, because I contend that there probably are only a handful of districts in the country that are drawn without an eye towards politics. The one that comes to mind is Wyoming, because they have one. So that's a pretty fairly drawn district. But the fact of the matter is that whoever's in charge, whoever's drawing those lines, has some political pull, even if they don't recognize it. And I think very often they do recognize it, and the districts are drawn for those very reasons. So my question to you is, and I get some of the safeguards, you can't be a politician, a relative of a politician, you can't have worked for a politician, any number of safeguards for the people that would be selected for the commission. But don't you have to have people with some political acumen to be interested enough to do that? So is it going to be difficult to find people? And forget for a moment, how do you qualify somebody as a truly independent? Because a lot of people think themselves independent when in fact they probably have a bent one way or the other. But are you going to be able to find the right folks to do that?
Well, I believe so, and I think it's going to hinge on whether or not you have a Secretary of State who, as I will really aggressively talk to citizens all across the state from every corner about how we need them to apply, be engaged in the process, because the more citizens we have applying with computer expertise and data expertise, the better, the more we'll have an opportunity to ensure that there's lots of people at the table. And I will take, the experience in California, that they've already done something like this in California successfully, where they created an independent commission Commission had citizens with no partisan, necessarily partisan leanings, but background in drawing district lines. That was a commission that worked really well in California. But I think it's going to come down to two things. One, removing the conflict of interest that's right now in districting. And so no matter who's selected to be on this commission, their job won't rely on how the districts are drawn. And right now, legislators' jobs rely on how those districts are drawn. That's why there's a conflict of interest in how they draw literally their own districts and those of their friends. So we're removing that conflict entirely. And then secondly, there are seats on, the commission is created so that there's a balance, recognizing that everyone does have potentially some partisanship. And so you have a requirement to have a certain number of independents, Democrats and Republicans on the commission to create that balance. And the overall goal is to ensure everyone's committed to drawing fair and competitive districts and that there's a balance of everyone who's represented.
Let's shift gears for a minute, and I did not mean that to be the horrible pun that it's going to end up being, but the other part of the job of the Secretary of State in Michigan, unlike many other states, is that you're also the DMV. And we know the driver responsibility fees are going away, and in fact, as we talk, that is part of what's going on. But the cost, the fees associated with licenses, registration, the fees associated with, not that it's controlled by the Secretary of State, but it's certainly something that you kind of have to oversee. It's auto insurance, because they have to provide the proof of insurance to the Secretary of State's office. How big of a job is that, in addition to all what we've just talked about election-wise?
Well, yeah, the Secretary of State is the chief advocate for drivers and driving safety in the state of Michigan, and so we need to ensure that the Secretary of State is ready to hold the line on increases in drivers' fees as well. And that's been a key component of my platform. I've said I want to be a Secretary of State to save citizens time, make it easier, 30 minutes or less, to get in and out of branch office, and also save citizens money by holding the line on new drivers' fee increases. Just like when I was dean at Wayne State Law School, I successfully worked to freeze tuition. And that means sometimes we need to be willing to cut our own budget, as I did as a dean, and do more with less, still expand services. So I'm going to bring with me that experience of doing just that as dean of Wayne State Law School, and bring that as Secretary of State, who will work with the legislature to freeze drivers' fee increases and advocate for fair insurance rates. I live in the city of Detroit. I drive in the city of Detroit. I know how high and unfair all of our insurance rates are around the state, and I will be a voice for insurance reform and with an eye towards what's best for our drivers.
One of the things that has happened over the course of time, and we talked a little bit about it when we talked about elections, but things have become more and more automatic, more and more electronic. And the Secretary of State's office is no different. In fact, I do virtually all of my interactions with the Secretary of State's office, either by mail or online, because you can do it. As you go forward, that's another question of security. If all of that's happening online, how can you be sure it's me that's getting that driver's license? Or how can you make sure? So is there a security element there too?
Oh, absolutely. We need to ensure that if we're moving more services online, which is part of my plan, create an app for Secretary of State branch office services to expand the number of times you can go online to get your work done, and go to kiosks in other parts, and want to partner with local businesses so that you can renew your tabs while you do your grocery shopping. So as we deliver more conveniences through technology to our citizens, we need to make sure we're doing so securely. And that's why I think we need a security office in the state of Michigan, in the Secretary of State's office, to address both election security and technological security in other parts of the office as well.
You've just met two candidates in one of the big races that you'll have to decide coming up in just over 4 weeks. We'll talk more about that when we come back. To the point. In just over 4 weeks, you're going to have some very important races to decide, including the race for governor. And on Friday night at 7 o'clock, right here in this studio, we will host the first statewide debate for the Republican and Democratic candidates for governor. Senator Gretchen Whitmer, Attorney General Bill Schuette will be here to talk about what they will do if elected. It'll be a good chance to help you make a decision, and we'll see you next Sunday morning. To the point.